Hello, everyone, and welcome to Life After the Military, a show completely focused on strengthening the mental fitness of veterans and their families, helping them transition from military to civilian life, and helping them overcome adversity. Our show is powered by Pivotal Moments. Go check them out at pivotalmoments.org to learn more. My name is Lee Elias, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend and co-host, Howie Cohen. And we are privileged to have United States Marine Corps veteran and current military and recruitment program coordinator for Dominion Energy, Matt Kellam, with us today. Matt served 6 years of service in the United States Marine Corps. And when Matt first transitioned from the Marine Corps, he worked for 10 years in recruiting for Aerotech from 1998 to 2008. Matt transitioned to Dominion Energy in 2008 and has been with them for over 13 years. Matt held 3 different positions during his tenure and currently serves as the Dominion Energy Military and Recruitment Program Coordinator. Dominion Energy is an extremely military-friendly organization with 1 in 5 employees having been a military veteran. We will dive deeper into that and more. But first, Matt, welcome to Life After the Military.
Hey, thank you very much, Lee. It's an honor to be here with you all today, and I've been looking forward to this for a while. When I first got to chat with Howie and some others, I know the great work you all are doing and the messages you all are conveying. But more importantly, I know these are fun conversations. So I'm glad to be with you guys.
Well, we're really happy to have you, Matt. Thank you.
Yeah,
I was going to say the honor is all mine. I'm a little hurt you talked to Howie before me, but that's pretty much the nature of the show. But Matt, let's just start off.
And he will talk to you. He will talk to me after he meets you today, Lee. So I will. That's going to continue. Okay.
Yeah, but Howie, I'm going to make you a coffee after this episode just to tell you, say I'm sorry. So that's the way that works. So, Matt, first question is pretty obvious and generic, but we have to ask it of everybody. You spent 6 years of service in the U.S. Marines. Share with us your experience. Share with us the stories, how that shaped you. And once again, if you have stories from that time period that you feel comfortable sharing, please do, because it's gives the audience some context.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that opportunity to chat about that. So it's interesting. So I actually enlisted into the Marine Corps when I was a senior in high school, and I'm not afraid to admit my age. It was 1993 when I graduated. Originally, I intended to go active duty into the Marine Corps, but shortly after I had, I guess, made that enlistment commitment, I changed my mind and wanted to go to school full time and do the reserves at the same time. So I actually ended up going to, I'm here in Richmond, Virginia, but I ended up going to Virginia Commonwealth University full time and then did the Marine Reserve. So I actually bumped out and did a delayed entry. So after my first year of college, went to boot camp at Parris Island and then did 6 years on the Marine Reserve side. But during that time, if you're doing the math, it was basically my 6 years of active reserve time was from 94 to 2000. So it was essentially peacetime. I got in and got out pretty quietly, which I'm thankful for. But, obviously when we're committing to the military, at some point we're preparing ourselves and mentally preparing ourselves, for whatever it is that we may have to be called to do. And I know that you all know that well, but what was interesting is, so I literally don't have war stories, but I have, good experiences and good lessons that I took from my time in the military, which I feel like I'm actually able to pay forward in my civilian career. And I know we'll get into that, but what was interesting is I just purely by my age and my date of graduating high school and all that, I came in right after the Persian Gulf War or Persian Gulf era, I guess. But then the end of my full 8-year commitment was actually in May of 2001. So I actually got out right before 9/11. And, I realize that a lot of people have served during, as a result of and after 9/11. But that was actually my biggest challenge. It was not what I did in the service. It was making a decision of whether I would go back in or not.
Right.
And thankfully, and I think this actually kind of relates to some of the conversation we might have, or even the theme of your discussions here. But I had a really close family friend who was a retired Navy officer. He's actually a rector at the church that my family had gone to for many years. And he basically said, look, you don't decide what happens when you're serving. But if you served honorably and you get out honorably, that's what's most important. Now, you can do some things, moving forward, but it doesn't have to be going back in. So that was actually the hardest decision that I had to make related to my service, was whether I was going to go back in or not. And I made the decision not to. But the last thing I'll say is I think what the military taught me, I was very fortunate to have a good upbringing, had good family. My grandparents, grandfathers were both Navy veterans. So, I had a little bit of military instilled in me, whether I knew it or not. I'll tell you a little bit more about my family story in a few minutes. But at any rate, I think the thing that I took away the most from the military was decision making and being decisive and confident in the decisions that I make. It basically, my time in the military, and I played a lot of sports in high school and had, some chances to play Division III college sports, but didn't really pursue those. But it taught me to think ahead, basically anticipate, plan, and prepare. And I think that's really what I've taken from my time in the service. And I think that really applies to much of what I do in my civilian career now and how I'm working with other transitioning service members, veterans, and spouses.
Yeah, and Matt, I will tell you, and this is a constant recurring theme in our podcast, and I think Lee and I like to reinforce it periodically and it doesn't matter whether it's 6 years, 16 years, 26 years, it's irrelevant. I think the military prepares us in so many different ways to do other things later in our life. And I know from my experience, there's no doubt in my mind that the Marine Corps has taught you a ton of things that you apply on a day-to-day basis. And I'm sure it has set you up well to be as successful as you are right now. Hey, Lee, I didn't even think to mention this, before we actually started to record, but Matt is actually a high school friend and teammate of Will's out in LA. We have for those of you in our audience, we have obviously we have several channels that are part of the Pillow Moments team. And but we also have a group in the Nashville area and a group in the LA area. And one of our good colleagues and great colleagues is Will Browning, and Matt and Will were actually, if I remember right, Matt, you're baseball teammates, right, in high school?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah.
Right, so now's a great time to transition the episode to making fun of Will. So why don't you give us a word on Will? Yeah, no, we'll make sure he doesn't listen to this episode. No, he's going to listen. Will, if you're listening, we love you.
I've signed certain agreements where I won't talk about him.
Smart.
Yeah, no, but I will say two things real quick. Yes, you're correct. Will Browning and I actually reconnected, I guess, within the last year and a half or two. And yeah, he spent a lot of time out in LA. But anyway, yes, us being reconnected has been great because not only have I been introduced to you all and to all of these efforts but also, and again, I'll talk about it in a few minutes, I think. But one of the people that he introduced me to is a Navy SEAL that he met out in LA, who's now back in Virginia, and he actually now works for Dominion Energy based on that connection. So even if Will and I don't talk for another 10, 15, 20 years, it has been so meaningful to have been reconnected just in the last year and a half or so. And I will say, Howie, I really appreciate what you said about, no matter the duration of your time in service, we all learn a lot of valuable lessons. I will say one kind of funny thing, us Marines, at some point in time, we think we're the best at everything, even though we're not always or often. And I'm very proud of the things we are good at. But I did amphibious assault in the Marine Corps. And so obviously we had to work really closely with the Navy. Right. And, there's all the jokes about the Navy and the Marine Corps in between us and so forth. But because of the nature of my role, the very first time that I was on ship and about to splash off, and I was actually kind of last in line down in the well deck, but we were all kind of getting ready to splash off and just do a training exercise. I could see to the vehicle on my right, there was another Marine driver, and I was a driver at the time, not yet a crew chief, getting yelled at by somebody. I didn't know who. And so anyway, I had my head turned and paying attention to him getting in trouble for something. And all of a sudden, I get this big wallop on the back of my comm helmet, and I turn around like ready to fight, like I could do anything sitting in the driver's seat. And it was the Navy, I guess basically the ground guy that stands up on kind of the catwalk. He had come all the way down and basically told me, "Don't ever take your eyes off me. It's not safe, so forth and so on," whatever he said. And in that moment, I was like, all right. But I really then appreciated what it means that the Navy runs a tight ship. And you know what? We have to work together. And I'll just do whatever he tells me. And when he says go, I go.
I want to say before we jump into the next question, Howie, too, and it's actually a perfect segue for what I'm about to say. Building on the fact that the tenure of service is irrelevant to what you learn. I really want to say this to our listeners because I don't care how long you served, when you served, what you did when you served, as long as you served.
Yep.
And I say on this show often that, and I'm actually using this in a different way now, but I always talk about how the military is the greatest team on the planet. All right. And they are. And I always equate that to something, but people love their sports teams. Right. And this is the deal. This is how I've always looked at the military. Man, my team doesn't win the Stanley Cup every single year. All right. In fact, they haven't ever won it in my lifetime. I have a Super Bowl here.
Probably never will, Lee, but okay.
All right, we'll talk after the episode about that on another show called Howie Makes Another Mistake. But no, look, here's the deal. My point is we're fans of sports teams and we support our teams no matter what, right? Whether they're winning, they're losing, it doesn't matter. And, to me, the military has always been that at a higher level than even my sports teams. Like, it doesn't matter what you did or do or don't do or what war or combat you were in.
Yeah.
If you served for us, I'm here to serve you.
Yep.
Right. And I want that message to go out there because I have a vet that works for me, was not in the service that long. He had to get out due to an injury.
Yeah.
And I know from speaking to him, there's a lot of not regret, but there's a lot of, man, I could have done more. I tell him, I don't care. I don't care if you were in for 16 months, you were in.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And I just have so much respect for those that serve. So just echoing what Howie said and Matt, what you said is that, if you served, you served, period. And no matter the tenure of it, you learned a lot. You learn about leadership. You learn about, how to do things. And I think a lot of us could learn from the example that all of the branches, as you just said, set, whether you're getting hit in the helmet or
in the ass, there's all different kind of body parts that they'll aim for here,
I was trying to keep it clean with my example, but no, you're right. And I know there's some more to talk about in this episode, but yeah, you're exactly right. And then I think the other lesson there is, just how can you continue to serve or pay it forward? And I think
you don't need the uniform to do it.
Right. Right. Well, and you're certainly doing that, Matt.
I appreciate that.
I joke with Howie all the time that I was the lowest rank in the military, which is male military spouse. To my wife, who was a major. So there's a lot to learn there, but no, honestly, I think my greatest
and Matt, a Navy and Marine can appreciate that. So Lee is like lower than whale poop, right? So,
but gladly.
But I do appreciate the role that you play as well, because I know we're all having fun and joking, but yeah, the family unit. I mean, and actually that's I know you have more questions to ask, and we're having good conversation, but that's the same with Dominion Energy and the energy industry. If we're making some connections to the future part of the conversation, because Dominion Energy and the energy industry, we are very much a service industry and service oriented, and even family members of ours, employees of the company, are very similar in many respects to that of the family members and spouses of the service members. So yeah, I very much appreciate the family unit and the spouse role.
No, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's an honor to be able to serve the military in this way. But you're right. Let's get back to the episode. Yeah. We will keep going.
Yeah. So hey, Matt. So what I'd like to transition now to is so about 1988. I guess it was like March of 1988. You left the Marine Corps. You went into the corporate workforce. You worked for Aerotech for just a little over 10 years as a recruiter. But in addition to recruiting, you were actually serving Aerotech client needs as well. And you were responsible for not only training new recruits, but you performed as a diversity champion. You served as a regional military program coordinator. What I'd love for you to do is just describe your experience at Aerotech, specific to when you decided to get out of the Marines. How did you plan and prepare for your exit and for your transition to what was next? What went well? What didn't go well? What would you do differently now? And think about what kind of advice, guidance, direction you might give to the folks who are looking to transition now. And how did Aerotech help bring you into their organization? Maybe you can kind of share some of your thoughts and perspective and stories about that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I do want to say I am so proud and honored of the time that I did work for Aerotech, and Aerotech is still one of the best technical staffing companies out there. They fall under the Allegis Group companies, and but anyway, I'm really, really proud of my time there, and it taught me and developed me quite well for what I'm doing now. So I think I'm going to give you yet another unique response, because I was actually in the Marine Reserves again from 94 to 2000. So when I was starting with Aerotech in 1998, I still had a few more years on the reserve side. So technically, I was not transitioning from Marines to Aerotech, but I will tell you what I learned quickly to tell as my experience. And I think that these groups are sometimes forgotten in the military conversations. So my struggle was as a student veteran on the campus of VCU, and that had nothing to do with VCU. That
Right.
just had everything to do with just the experiences that I was having, as well as, I don't know that in some of these transition conversations that we're talking about guardsmen and women and reservists. So that's the perspective that I'll come at to in response to your question. So what was interesting back in the 93 to 97, 98 timeframe when I was roaming around VCU's campus, and I'm not afraid to admit I dropped out of college, but part of the challenge that I had was that I'd changed my major a few times. I hadn't yet decided what I wanted to do, with my life or with my career. I had just gotten into mass communications and public relations, which frankly, fast forward to now, that is in essence a lot of what I'm doing. So I probably should have stuck it out. But the challenge was back during that time, and maybe I wasn't listening very well or paying close attention, but back during that time, there wasn't as many internship opportunities as there are these days.
Right.
And so the message that I want to share is a few things. One, for student veterans that are in school now, it is so important to take part in any kind of experiential learning that you can, whether it's an internship, a co-op, maybe if it's a military fellowship, if that's applicable. But whatever it is, get engaged in your program and the career opportunities that it affords, even if it's not the place that you want to go to. But that's a message there. And I think that that's a large part of why I dropped out. Because I wasn't feeling a connection to what I was, hearing in the classroom, even though I was interested ultimately in mass communications and public relations. And then the other piece of it is, because I was kind of waffling around with my education and didn't really know what I wanted to do. There were nights, and this is kind of part of my struggle that I had to learn from. There were nights where I would just leave my evening class halfway through during the break, and I would just go home. I didn't live on campus. It's an urban campus. And I'm not afraid to admit, there were nights where I would cry on the way home because I had no clue what I was going to do, but I just knew I wasn't interested in sitting in that class, or I couldn't feel the connection. So, the other part of that is, never mind, the experiential learning is important, but now I know a lot of schools have veteran groups, whether it's a Student Veterans of America, whether it's, I know there are green zones on some campuses, or whatever the student veteran organization is. That is another thing that I would recommend for student veterans to get engaged with.
Yeah, that's fascinating, Matt. And I apologize, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
Yeah.
As I think back of all the podcasts we've done, Lee, I don't think that's ever come out before, has it?
No, not in that way. I can tell you too, Matt, what's funny about university and thinking, and something you brought up that I think is important to tap on as well, is that, when you're learning, you really want to love what you're learning. And if
Yep.
you're not, it's okay to change, right? Like that's
Yeah.
something I could see, especially veterans having a hard time with, and people in the military have a hard time with, is, well, I'm supposed to be on this track. And we see this in just kind of younger college students of like, well, I have to be this major. Why? Because my dad told me to do it. I mean, you're going to do this rest of your life. You better try and enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I also think it's important to mention that what you said was experience is extremely important.
Mhm.
And I think that that's something that's still lacking even now.
Yeah.
Is that, but it's almost reverse, right? Like if you were in the military, you probably have the experience now, but you might not have the degree. Whereas, it might've been different back then, but yeah, no, I didn't even realize there were organizations on a campus for that type of learning. And I think that's a phenomenal point that you brought that up as a resource.
Yeah, I mean, and what I kind of connected to, Lee, if we go back to the Skate for the 22 Foundation podcast, one of the things we discussed on that session was that, and it rang so true to me, and I really hadn't thought about it that much, is what we find, and these two guys who started this organization, they were literally trying to create an opportunity where the veterans in their geographical area would have a place to connect to and back to provide the camaraderie, the collegiality of being in the military. And I kind of equate that, and I hadn't ever thought of that before, but veteran students, so men and women who are still in uniform in whatever form or fashion, have a connection to that the kind of the team bond that you develop in the military, and then you're away from it and you lose that. And now, so you have an opportunity to maybe seek that out on a college campus where I never even knew that, like Lee said, that organizations like that existed. That is a phenomenal piece of information that I wasn't even thinking about and aware of. And I'm glad you really brought that up, because again, we've done probably a dozen or so podcasts now. I don't ever remember that coming out before. So that's awesome.
Yeah, no, well, I'm glad it's a meaningful, piece of information to share. And it's funny because, when it first dawned on me, and kind of going back to my first response. So, I'm engaged with and still am an organization in the energy industry. And they basically asked me, hey, who can Dominion Energy send as the veteran to talk about, their transition to the energy industry. And I said, well, Dominion Energy, we don't just ship people all over and, have that kind of an expense. So I'm a service member, and that group knew that. I was like, let me serve both roles. Let me talk about this particular program, and let me be your veteran. And it actually dawned on me at that time, and this was probably 8 to 10 years ago, that was my experience. Again, I don't have the same experiences that some active duty folks have. My service was a little bit shorter than some. I mean, still 6 years. But anyway, it really dawned on me that, that student veteran and that Guard and Reserve pocket of individuals needs to also be talked about. And anyway, so those are two things I would share. The third thing I would say is going back to the first question, and what are some of the things that I learned from and still take from the military, and there's a lot. But just like any other traditional transition from active duty to civilian employment, I still recommend that folks start early in preparing, and even if it's education programs. So Lee, this kind of gets to the point that you were acknowledging. Think ahead and plan ahead on what it is that you enjoy doing, and that might actually kind of correlate back to what it is that you want to study. And if it's not a match, then don't be afraid to make the change. So I think what's interesting is in this conversation that transitioning happens multiple times and at different points in your experience. And that is absolutely what I've experienced in my 20-some years.
So, Matt, I'll make two big points based on what you said when it comes to college and university, just to hammer the point home to anybody listening that might be considering that. Someone said to me one time, it was a younger person, but they said, if I don't do this major, I failed, right? They hated it. They hated what they were studying. And they said, I failed. And I said to them, and they were young, I said, the failure will be if you do this the rest of your life, hate it, and you're a bad father and a bad husband and you're miserable. That's a failure.
Yep.
I said, but changing your major because you don't like it, that's triumphant. That's courageous, right? You got to do something you love to do. I was very blessed. I knew what I wanted to study. And when I look back now, I just realized I was really blessed to even know that. You might not know, and that's okay. The other larger point that I want to hammer home too, and Howie was alluding to this, and I always like to give my sports analogies, right? Because, teams have a lot of common ground, right? After every season I've ever played hockey, even if I was super injured or not, or if we won the championship or not, it was actually worse when we win a championship, but you have that postseason depression. Right. It's like a hangover, right? Because you're not with your brothers, your sisters or anything anymore. And it comes and it goes kind of quickly, but it's about a week off. You're like, oh, it's nice to relax. And there's about 2-3 weeks where you're kind of depressed because you're just not in the groove anymore.
Yeah.
Well, what happens after 6 years, 20 years, 15 years, when you're on the greatest team on the planet? And when we're talking about mental fitness and mental health, There, in my opinion, there's very little, if any, mental preparation for vets transitioning with that, because you're going to a totally different world and you're completely losing the best team on the planet. I shouldn't say completely, but so your point about seeking out help or looking for other people that have gone through it or finding those groups, it's essential. It's essential because having done a lot of these interviews, more than a dozen, Howie, by the way, having done a lot of these interviews, we haven't met anybody that's left the military and was just like, man, that was great. What a great transition process.
Yep.
Like we're, you realize quickly doing the show, you're not going to interview someone who did it perfectly because it doesn't exist.
That's right.
It doesn't.
You know what I mean?
And I'll give an example in a few minutes when we get to one of the next questions. But even if you prepare a year or two in advance, there's, like, to your point, there's always some obstacles. You either have to, you got to be patient. You got to wait for the job to open up. Whatever. You might have the strongest network, and you might have connected with that veterans group that helps you with that ongoing camaraderie, whether it's on campus or elsewhere. But there's always something. Yeah, you're exactly right.
There's a great quote. Everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. Most people in the military have been punched in the face. So you're prepared more than we are. But it is what it is. All right, let's keep moving here because a lot of side chatter. It's my fault, but I wanted to make those points. There is no perfect transition, right? But if you're in the military, you're actually better prepared for that than most, right? So, Matt, we were talking about this in 2008. You transitioned to Dominion Energy. We've mentioned them several times, and you've held 3 different positions there since February of 2008. So talk about how you found Dominion Energy and explain why you chose to work with them. Again, Howie's going to dive deeper into the actual positions you held, but we definitely want to hear about how you found this organization.
Well, again, I think I might be giving you a fairly unique response. I have to say, it was actually really hard to leave Aerotech. And again, I mentioned a moment ago, we all have different types of transitions throughout our career. It's not just leaving the military and then landing in civilian world and you're good to go. So, I actually equate me leaving Aerotech as another part of my transition, because I actually knew I needed to make a move about a year before I did. So right around my 9-year mark. And I did all the networking, the planning. I went to lunches with people who'd already made the move, et cetera. But how I landed at Dominion Energy is unique in that I'm actually the 4th generation now in my family to work for Dominion Energy.
Wow.
So I knew growing up, I knew my dad worked there, and I'll kind of quantify that a bit in a moment. My grandfather was working, and at the time it was VEPCO, Virginia Electric Power Company, when I was a kid. But what I didn't know until my grandfather passed a number of years ago, and I did some Ancestry.com stuff. What I did not know was that my great-grandfather had also worked at VEPCO initially as an electrician down in the Norfolk, Virginia area, because he was a former Navy. So I guess they got out and lived in that area. But eventually they also moved the family up to Richmond, and he was a system operator for a small station in the area. So collectively, between the 4 generations, and my brother actually works for Dominion Energy now, we have over 120 years with the company. So 13.
That's incredible.
Yeah, a little over 13 years ago, to answer your question, Dominion Energy was on the very short list of places that I knew I was going to go. But something else, and we've been kind of talking about this in the first few questions, I learned early on in high school baseball, playing with Will Browning and so forth. But I learned from one of our coaches. He used to always say that luck was timing and preparation coming together. So I think that's another message that I would share with the listeners, is that you need to do all the preparation that you're hearing in these episodes or that you're learning from others, networking, planning, all that stuff. But at some point, the luck of it is going to be the timing. And for me, the luck of it was Dominion Energy back in 2007. So 1 year before I joined, had actually centralized its talent acquisition functions into the corporate office in Richmond. It, in the years past, it just kind of lived out in the different stations, and HR folks out in the field handled those functions. So come 2008, when I was, late 2007, early 2008, when I was interviewing and being accepted, I was very fortunate because I was lucky in the timing. I'd done all the preparation part, and I had all the skills that Aerotech had afforded me, thankfully. But it was timing. And so anyway, I joined Dominion for all those various reasons. And I just have to say, to put a plug in for Dominion Energy and the energy industry as a whole, because there's a lot of great companies out there across the country. But My grandfather retired. He was a Navy veteran. He retired after 40 years from the company in 1985. And my dad retired after 45 years in 2018. And what's interesting is my dad is the only one who didn't go into the military. So 3 out of the 4 generations are veterans. And the reason being is he actually started with VEPCO 2 weeks out of high school. So that also speaks to the stability of the industry, and that we have a lot of opportunities to serve even in our energy industry.
And it's interesting in my research for this, Matt, and I found this absolutely fascinating. And you just spoke to it again. Is that, and I don't know if the folks caught it in Lee's introduction of Matt, but 1 in 5 employees of Dominion Energy is a veteran. I mean, that's an incredibly high statistic, and I think that's phenomenal. Yeah. It is clearly a veteran-friendly organization that is actively recruiting and bringing on and taking care of veterans, and that's why we developed a strategic partnership with Dominion Energy for that exact reason, and why I want to continue to grow the relationship with you and other leaders inside Dominion Energy as well. I just think that's a phenomenal statistic. But I mean, if you just look at the Kellam family, you're reinforcing that same statistic. That's incredible.
Yeah.
So Matt, continuing on with Dominion Energy. So in 2010, you took a strategic staffing position there. And while you served in this role, you supervised the strategic staffing team, who was responsible for Dominion's partnerships with colleges, universities, trade and technical schools, the communities that Dominion Energy worked with, the civic organizations, and as you're proving out, military and veteran organizations, as well as their student employment program. So what I'd love to do, because again, this is a little bit different than what we've experienced before on the podcast, is let's talk about these kinds of partnerships you developed within the community and some of these other organizations. And I'd love to understand what motivated Dominion Energy to do this. And maybe there's some interesting stories you can share about those partnerships or people that kind of helped each other out in those kinds of activities.
Yeah, so I think it's important for me to pay some respect to my predecessor, who was at that time in 2010 in that supervisory role. That gentleman was a Navy veteran, and unfortunately, I think it might have been a Monday or Tuesday night, but anyway, he passed away one night. And so when we all came back in the office the next morning, we learned of that. And of course, there's all sorts of emotions and there's things to work through. And part of the reason I mention that is, one, I want to pay a lot of respect to him because he laid a lot of solid foundation. He was a Navy veteran. And but what was interesting is that was yet another transition for me. At the time, I'd been with the organization and was supporting our nuclear business unit as a recruiter. And applying, a lot of these diverse and military sourcing efforts to help our nuclear business unit. And we were, having great successes, but I was not pursuing a promotion at the time or any kind of change. So when he passed, and then, within that week after that, when my leadership at the time, discussed with me, and they said, look, we'd like for you to TA or temporarily assign into this supervisor role because of your past experiences. And I took the night to sleep on it, talked to my family, and I came back and I said, yes, I want to, because I could see all the possibilities and opportunities. And then, so to answer your question, I think what's really important is, and this is for any industry, but, Dominion Energy especially, it's really important to tell stories. And that's why I really appreciate what you all do here in this platform across all your different episodes and channels, because the storytelling is so important. And in that strategic staffing team, it's important for us to go out and build relationships with K through 12 students, predominantly the high school level, community college students, which we already had a pretty good, program for college, 4-year college university, as well as military and diverse and community organizations. And the reason being is because our industry, as well as the military, we recognize that we have to reflect the communities that we serve. Yeah. And the only way that we're going to be able to build sustainable talent pipelines is if we get out on the street, so to speak, and go and build those relationships and tell our stories, tell why we love what we do, but then also show them how to pursue our careers when they're ready. So that's, kind of in essence, that's why we, did the work we did. I'll admit it, there's always opportunities. I mean, we're still, I'm not a supervisor on that side of the house anymore, but we're still doing that. And I think that actually kind of speaks to the reasons that and I think, we'll talk about this in a moment, but I think that speaks to why our then CEO, Tom Farrell, who also unfortunately has recently passed, I think that's why, part of the reason why he knew that we had to make a definitive commitment to our military programs. Yeah. So anyway, I'll pause there, but I think it's, that's the reason that the company knew that we needed to be committed to it, and why we had a team and still do, in our talent acquisition group dedicated to it. And I do just want to say, in this, the underlying theme to this part of my message is for any of the listeners that you have to always look back at your experiences and pull all the positives out from it. Even if, kind of, Lee, you were talking about this, even if it may not have felt like a positive or good experience at the time, there's some learn from it. So what's ironic is I'm a college dropout, and I'm not proud of it, but I'm not ashamed of it, in many respects. And what's interesting is, because of that experience, I actually feel like I'm better at telling the story about why technical high schools and community college programs and workforce programs for adult workers or whomever that want to make a change or whatever it is. I feel like I'm better suited to help tell that story and show them that there are multiple pathways that you can go to get into a meaningful career.
Yeah, and you're reminding me of a couple of things, and I didn't connect the dots till just now as I was listening to you, Matt. When I was back in the Crystal Group, two of the project teams I was on, two of the clients I had was an international gold mining company, and they mined other metals, as precious metals as well. But and then it was ExxonMobil, the leading oil and gas producer in the world, and also an international organization. But it rings so true to me when I think back, because you have this company that was headquartered in another country, but they're going into multiple international communities. And one of the things they actually had a significant portion of their leadership team dedicated to community relations.
Yeah,
because literally they're going into another country, and they're trying to get the rights to drill out highly precious metal, taking it from that country's land and figure out, and oh, by the way, potentially doing something that, if it's not managed properly, can cause significant damage to their natural resources and to their environment. So they have to be very careful to manage that, to develop a trusted relationship with the communities that they're mining in, to hire people from those communities. So they're not just bringing in, folks like us, but they're hiring, folks from the countries that they're mining in, and giving them an opportunity to grow and develop and earn money and take care of their families. It kind of makes sense now, because I'm sure Dominion Energy is in its own way. It's a very similar type of relationship with the community.
Yeah. And just to go off a couple of things you said there, the way I've approached the work that I do currently, and even the work in my previous role as a supervisor, and I now support a supervisor that does similar functions that I used to do. But at any rate, I really believe that, and I think we can probably relate to this coming out of the last, couple of years that we've experienced in our society. But I really believe that making systemic commitments and improvements to education, at least in this case, or military transition, if you will, is really important. So I think, systemic changes is important, but also sustained partnerships and changes. And a lot of those things only come from strong community relations. So right. Companies like Dominion Energy and even our military across all the branches, of course, we have strong, community and government and external affairs, because any good relationship is only as good as the commitment that you have to that relationship. So,
well, and listen, I'm going to take the opportunity right now too. When I made up my mind to commit to Bob Morgan to be the director of the Charlie Mike channel, and as I started to learn and grow into this position, I realized as Lee and I were putting together the concept of the podcast and who we wanted to interview and create a guest interview list, it became pretty apparent early on that there were three types of guests that I thought we ought to pursue. And one clearly is the men and women who served in uniform, who went through transitions and can share whatever they learned, good, bad, whatever, and share those lessons learned and hopefully make it easier for the men and women following them to have a successful and highly effective transition, right? So that's the first type. The second is it became very clear to me early on, there are a significant number of veteran service organizations that provide tremendous services and offerings to veterans to help them succeed and be effective in that transition process. So I wanted to identify them, vet them, and the ones who were doing it well, I wanted to bring representatives onto our show and let them spotlight what they do. So now we can say, hey, folks, if you're getting ready to transition, might be an organization you want to link yourself up with because they could probably help you be successful. And then the third were the companies, the organizations, whatever, that were doing what Dominion Energy is doing. And that is actively recruiting men and women in uniform or who were in uniform into their organization and helping them adjust into that new life, helping their families adjust. And so that they can then add value to that company because they will add value. And that's why, so you actually meet two of those three criteria, right? You served in uniform and you work for a company that is doing exactly that, setting a standard, setting the model for other organizations to follow, which I think is so important for us to highlight and spotlight so that other leaders from other companies that are watching, maybe they'll learn and model what you guys are doing, and then we can take better care of our veterans as well. And listen, the last thing I'll say, and this is for the folks, the men and women who are transitioning, getting ready to transition, if you're not looking at Dominion Energy for a possible employment opportunity, I think you might be. And listen, it may not be, some things may not be exactly what you want to do, but I know that the organization has to be so diverse in its offerings. There's got to be something for a large portion of our transitioning veterans that it will give you something meaningful and passionate to do. But here's a company that's doing it right. Here's a company that is actively recruiting men and women from the military, bringing them in, taking great care of them, properly training them, properly transitioning them, and give them a great opportunity for them and their families to make that transition. And if I were a transitioning veteran right now, I'd be on that Dominion Energy website. I'd be getting in touch with Matt Kellam. I would be looking hard at what in Dominion Energy it would fit for me, because to me, I'd want to be a part of that team.
I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you for all the above.
Well, I mean, it's just true, right? And that's the whole reason why I wanted to have you on this show, is because Dominion Energy is doing it right. And more importantly, for the folks who are looking for an opportunity, take a look at Dominion Energy. It may be a good fit. It may not be a good fit, but at least take a look, because this could be a very efficient and effective way to transition and take care of yourself and your families.
Yeah. Lee, I know you're this may be a good segue to some of the last couple pieces that we'll talk about, but Howie, in response to what you said, first of all, I thank you. Dominion Energy is very committed to the military and veteran space. In all the ways that we're engaged. And I think we'll chat about that in a second. But I just have to say our current leadership all the way up to our top level CEO and president and all the other C-suite executives and down are very, very good leaders, very sincere, very supportive of all of these related efforts, but especially our military programs. But I have to give all the credit to Mr. Tom Farrell, again, who's recently passed.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
What's interesting is he did not serve in the military himself, but his father, grandfather, and great grandfather were all well accomplished Army officers.
Wow.
And so he came up, so Lee, we talked about military family a few minutes back. He came up in that military family and in that military setting as a child, but that carried on with him. And really, I think probably, the way that I've heard him tell stories in the past, really influenced a lot of what he did. And to the degree that Dominion Energy lives by 5 core values in everything that we do, much like each branch of the service does. So I just have to, pay that respect to Mr. Farrell, but that his legacy continues to live in the work that we do today.
Well, and I hope so too. It's interesting, and Lee has done the same thing. We study organizations based on their ability to build a strong team bond and their ability to develop leaders and their ability to, accomplish, successful outcomes. And I do, and it's very unfortunate that Mr. Farrell has passed recently, because if he's had that kind of leadership impact on the organization, I just hope that the folks that are succeeding him are able to and willing to keep that legacy alive, and then the organization can continue to thrive and help the veterans thrive as well. I really hope that plays out. That would be awesome, and I'm sure that's going to happen, because when you develop a culture like that, hey, and I don't mean to say this in any disrespectful way, but kind of like the military, when someone goes down with an injury, hey, it's next man up, right? So in some cases, I guess it's kind of true even in corporate America, when unfortunately someone either steps away or is taken away, there's an opportunity for the next leader to step up and continue to build a legacy. And I hope that's what's happening. So that's great.
Yeah. Well, and Matt, I was going to say, you can see that he's living on in the way you just described him, right?
Yeah.
Like, like I said, it's not even just limited to the leadership team. Again, you need a strong leader in place, but it sounds like he had such an impact on everybody that, like you said, 5 core values, that, right? So it's in you right now too. Like, Howie and I talk all the time. There's a little bit of a sidestep here, but it is astonishing how many organizations have A, poor leadership, and B, if you went up to an employee and asked, what are you doing here? They really couldn't tell you. I mean, they might tell you what their job is, but they couldn't tell you why they're doing their job. And I always go back to that great NASA story about when JFK asked the janitor, what are you doing here? And the janitor said, I'm working to put a man on the moon.
Yeah.
It was a clear mission. You know what I mean? It was serious. Yeah. And so I think we just saw that it was a glimmer of it, but we saw that in what you just said. And I think that's really important for everybody to note, especially transitioning veterans, as I come full circle here. Look for that company culture, because I'll be honest with you, vets, anybody transitioning, civilian world doesn't exactly have their crap together when it comes to this type of stuff. I'm just going to be blatantly honest. And if you're transitioning out of the military, you have a skill set that most of them need, but you also want to find a fit that understands that. Because if you end up in an organization that's only bottom line first, has no values, they don't care, you will be miserable. It's just, you will be miserable, because you're not, as a veteran, you are just not built that way. I've seen that too many times. You are built to be part of a team. So go find a team. Another quick comment before I give the mic back over to Howie. You talked about getting out into communities. And I think that's really important too. I've had a lot of discussions with veterans about this, and I pose it as more of a question, or as more of a statement here. But, if you've never had a conversation with someone of a different race, religion, preference, whatever it is, and you have strong opinions on that person, it's not a smart place to be.
Yeah.
Right. You want to have a conversation with somebody that's across the aisle or is living a different way before you come to any judgment. And because the truth is, you can't effectively lead, follow, mentor, or just discuss anything until you kind of see life through their point of view, if you even can.
Yeah.
And I just think we do not do that enough. That we have a lot of preconceived notions. We have a lot of quick to gotcha type responses to people. Yeah, well, you can't do that because of this. And it's like, well, have you ever done that? No, but it's because of this.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, it's not conducive to any kind of team building. And again, man, like, military is mostly American, but I've worked on teams where we've had people from multiple countries, and you always run into problems when you just assume something. Oh, that guy's from Slovakia. So he believes this. You can't do that. So anyway, if you're transitioning out of the military, because I'm not trying to make this a social hour, it's just the idea is, know that, right? That we all have our preconceived notions, but if you haven't walked a mile in someone else's shoes, to use that old adage, you just think twice before you come to any conclusions.
Well, and I'll respond to you in this way. And I think, I know we kind of prepped and talked about topics we wanted to cover. So actually, if you don't mind, I'll respond to what you said in a few ways. One of the first things I learned as a diversity champion, I went through training when I was with Aerotech, and I've gone through a number of other diversity training with Dominion Energy. But the one of the biggest things I took away from it was just respect. And actually, there was a conversation that I remember very vividly in my early training was just that, like, listen to the other person, find the things that you have in common. It's okay if you don't have much in common, but at least now you've listened and respect the differences or what you do have alike. So I think that's very important. I also think to your point and to what we're talking about, that's applicable to, military transition, whether it's from reserves to civilian or active duty to civilian or spouse, to civilian, whatever. But I think just, networking and being willing to not just the service member or spouse themselves having the conversation and learning more about the different industries in the civilian sector and finding, what are the differences and what's in common and so forth, but also the hiring leaders out there. I think it's really important for all of us to also be approachable and willing to have those conversations and just extend a hand. And, Dominion Energy, we do a really good job of that, I think. I mean, of course, there's 17,000 plus of us out there, but I think generally we do a really good job.
You champion
That's
it
right.
at Dominion Energy. Yeah. Not a pretty good job. You've championed it. Yeah.
Well, and here's a really good example. So, Howie, you might appreciate this, but we have, Dominion Energy is building offshore wind 27 miles off the coast of Virginia Beach here. And we're the first to do it in the United States. And so what's interesting is we are building an offshore wind team. Now we have really good leadership, and coincidentally or not, many of them are military veterans, but we're also adding a lot of talent to that offshore wind team. And so I met a gentleman. He actually approached me on LinkedIn probably about a year and a half, maybe a little bit more ago. And he said, "Hey, I'm transitioning. I'm going to be retiring from the Army. I'm a logistician, do transportation in the Army. I'm down here in, kind of the Hampton Roads area. And I'm just interested in Dominion Energy. Can we talk?" Well, sure. So I talked to him. And anyway, I, at the time I admitted, after the fact that I was just associating his experience with like supply chain, logistics, transportation, things like that. But probably about 6 months ago or so ish, we started talking more. And even back then, a year and a half ago, I said, just keep an eye out on this offshore wind work over the next, 5-6 years or what have you. There's going to be a lot of opportunities. And even if it's, not an engineering type or an operator type or a wind turbine type, there's going to be other supply chain and other things. Well, anyway, fast forward to about 6 months ago, we were talking and there was we had at the time a construction project manager position open, and it was specifically for our port construction. And what's interesting is he goes, "Matt, that's what I did. I did watercraft, logistics, transportation." And, and I said, "What?" I said, "Tell me more." And I admit, here I am doing this work for 23 plus years. And I never really knew about or thought about or had a reason to learn about the Army's watercraft.
Hey, Matt, did you know the Army has the largest number of watercraft in the entire U.S. military?
I do now.
Yeah.
So anyway,
they do. More than the Navy.
More than the Navy. And Lee, the point I'm making, I know I'm telling a long kind of choppy story, but the point I'm making is if I hadn't given him that chance to teach me more, if I hadn't asked the questions and just had the conversation, all of those things, he wouldn't have had the opportunity to see that he matched this position. The other layer to that story is, and I don't mind telling this, but our hiring leaders were just kind of innocently associating that type of position with the Navy and the Coast Guard and maybe someone from the Marine Corps. Not many of us know about what Howie just acknowledged is the Army's watercraft. So anyway, that was a long story to that gentleman actually works for us now. as a construction project manager for port construction.
Oh, that's awesome.
From the Army's watercraft side of the house. So, anyway, I wanted to share that because I think that, the way that we've committed to our military program, there's basically 4 quadrants that, my partner and I live by, and anyone else that we can kind of, tap into, like our Veterans Resource Group. But it's the sourcing and recruiting. So, of course, we're out there building a lot of relationships with installations, veteran service organizations. Howie, knows that we have a pretty big presence on LinkedIn. So that's one piece of it. That's the obvious piece. But then we also partner really closely with different organizations out there, whether it be the community college and universities or other, community and diversity organizations, to help with the pipeline piece of it. Because there, as we've kind of acknowledged, but haven't really said it in this conversation, there's a lot of service members that will transition out with an occupation from the military that doesn't perfectly align with some of the civilian jobs. Now, there's a lot of experiences that they have that are very much applicable to civilian jobs. But anyway, take me. I did amphibious assault in the Marine Corps. Who would have known I would have ended up and fallen into staffing or talent acquisition? But anyway, we work with those other schools and organizations to help create pipeline programs to help those transitioning service members get into our industry. The other piece of it is very much marketing and branding. And internally, we work closely with our advertising and public relations and other, government affairs and other groups like that, because we know that Dominion and all of us have to tell that story so that the word gets out. And again, there's a little bit of irony there, because that's what I was thinking I wanted to study, dropped out because I wasn't connected. But here, fast forward, I'm able to do that now. And then the very last thing is we have to educate internally. So it's upon me and my partner. His name is Sadiq Holiday, and I got to give him a shout out. He's my partner in crime. But Sadiq and I know that there's 2 of us that are dedicated to this work. And the only way that we will continue to be successful in this work is if we help our hiring leaders, if we help our HR partners, we help our talent acquisition partners by teaching them, to whatever degree is appropriate, the best practices for recruiting, hiring, and onboarding military veterans and spouses. And I think, all those different ways that we've kind of packaged our program is part of why over the past decade, 1 in 5 of our hires has been a veteran as they've identified themselves. And as of the end of June, 18% of our employees, our full-time employees, have identified as being a military veteran.
That's incredible. And listen, that is exactly the kind of information I would want to come out in an episode or an interview like this. Is you're literally given kind of a blueprint for other companies, organizations to follow to be successful in recruiting and integrating military veterans into their organization. That's perfect, Matt. Yeah. I mean, and listen, what I would encourage, if you are a leader in another company, in a company or organization, and this piques your interest, I would highly encourage you. You'll see when we post this podcast, you'll know ways to contact Matt, the different social media handles that he has. And I would highly encourage you or someone in your HR department or whomever to reach out to Matt and have further conversation with them, right? Learn what they're doing, how they're doing it. And if this interests you and you want to replicate it, you don't need to figure this out on your own. You can leverage what they're doing. It sounds like Matt and his team and Dominion Energy is willing to share that kind of information, because ultimately, hey, look, it's about taking care of the men and women in uniform, right? Yeah. That's the ultimate customer, the client here that all of us want to take care of. And it doesn't matter. I mean, obviously, Matt would love for you to come to work for Dominion Energy, but the bottom line is, I think Matt would be very confident or very happy if a veteran gets placed well and takes care of his or her family, whether they're a Dominion Energy employee or not. The most important thing for us is that we help you have an effective transition, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I just want to echo, I tell everyone that I speak with, whether it be through LinkedIn, email, phone call, opportunities like this, you're exactly right. I mean, of course, we'd love to have, some of the best out there come to Dominion Energy across our 16-state footprint. But that's just not realistic. And whatever I can do to help them end up in a place where they're happy and have meaningful employment and can take care of their families, as you just said, that is all that matters.
Cool.
It's all that
Cool.
matters.
Well, and listen, that's a great opportunity for us actually to go into the next question, and we've kind of talked about it a little bit. And Matt, if we feel like we've handled it, that's great. We can move on to the next question after that. But so as Lee mentioned in the introduction, you currently work as the military and recruitment program coordinator. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, which absolutely stunned me, is the fact that you have 1 in 5 employees are from a military background. And as you shared with us, is Dominion Energy is ranked by GI Jobs as one of the top 10 military-friendly companies nationwide, and that's since 2008. And that is a phenomenal statistic, and I know you got to be proud of that. And you've spoken very eloquently about your former CEO and what he's done. So, is there anything else you want to share with us? If there's any other stories or any other things that you haven't already discussed about Dominion Energy and the work you're trying to do to bring veterans, is there anything else that maybe you want to continue to reinforce, or maybe something we missed?
Yeah, I guess the only two things I would share is just to maybe provide just 2 points of context. So back in the late 2010, early 2011 timeframe, again, Mr. Farrell, our then CEO and president and chairman of our board, was actually also the chairman of the executive board for what's called the Edison Electric Institute. And basically, EEI is made up of about 80% of the shareholder-owned energy and utility companies out there. So anyway, they do a lot of things, which I'm not even familiar with all of them, but one of which is they have a nonprofit kind of arm of what they do called the Center for Energy Workforce Development, or CEWD. And what Mr. Farrell said at the time is that, we, the energy industry, needed to do more for our military veterans and transitioning service members. And so fast forward a little bit, and whatever the conversations behind the closed doors were, we, Dominion Energy, CEWD, and 4 other energy companies across the country were actually launching what's now called Troops to Energy Jobs.
Wow.
And Troops to Energy Jobs is basically a program that back then in 2011, we kind of piloted in a live format. So, we were building the plane as we were flying it, so to speak. And basically and then in 2013, Mr. Farrell actually launched the program at EEI's national conference in San Francisco for all energy companies to hop on board and be a part of. So fast forward to current date, there's actually about 60 companies that are part of the Troops Energy Jobs program. Basically, the program offers a template to employers that helps them with either building from scratch or just enhancing their existing military program. So you talked a little bit ago about sharing. We're absolutely in that mode where we want to help our energy partners. But then the other part of the program, and if you go to the website, which is just troopstoenergyjobs.com, there are tons of resources for transitioning service members, veterans, and spouses in all of the categories we've talked about: interviewing, resume writing, how to use the credentialing sites, like the cool sites, if you will, that the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, and some of the other branches offer. I mean, there's all of it. And even a job board. So all those 60-some companies in the energy industry, all of our jobs scrape to the job board. And we did all of that based on the vision that he and the other executive leaders had. So that's one thing I wanted to share. I think it's really important to talk about that Troops Energy Jobs program for our industry. But the other thing that I think is really important, and we talked about community and giving back. So I think it was probably about 5 years ago, because I think this will be the 5th year in Richmond, Virginia that we're doing this. But maybe 6 years ago, I should say, the PGA approached Mr. Farrell about bringing the senior PGA golf tournament back to Richmond, Virginia.
Okay.
And the long story short, as I've heard it, probably third or fourth hand, is that he said the only way that he would do that is if it was a charitable event. And then on top of that, if all the proceeds went to veteran organizations or military type organizations. So after 4 years of Dominion Energy hosting the Dominion Energy Charity Classic in Richmond, Virginia, I believe the number, and it's in some of our documents, but I believe we've had 3.5 billion, or not billion, 3.5 million with an M, proceeds go to veteran organizations here in the state of Virginia. And that's everything from like the Veteran Services Foundation for the Department of Veteran Services to a lot of other veteran service organizations. So I think that those are two really notable things to share, is that our commitment to our military efforts and program go far beyond sourcing and recruiting, and even to that type of event where we want to generate proceeds to the other organizations so that they can keep doing the good work that they're doing.
Yeah, and so Matt, what I would ask, and we could do this off camera. Obviously, I've got your social media handles that I'll collect and put into our show notes. But all the things that you just mentioned, I would love to get more information and links to those and include that in the show. So when we actually post the podcast, all that information will be available and accessible to any veterans that are viewing it, downloading it. And because I want to promote that, man, so if you can help me do that, I think that would be awesome. So Ben, I'm talking to my producer now in the background, our producer in the background. Please make sure I don't screw that up and forget to put that kind of information into the show notes, man. All right.
And I'm happy to share that.
Cool.
Yeah, because I will hold Howie accountable.
So somebody has to,
Right.
So,
I mean, who's going to look out for all these commissioned officers? I mean, us enlisted side, we got to take care of these guys.
The male military spouse.
That's right. The one lower than whale poop, right?
Matt, before we get into the final question, it is commonplace here that I create book covers. So for all of our guests, if you ever write a book, I come up with a book title, and this one came very early in the episode today, so it's gonna come full circle. Because again, I want to preface this with this: all the work you've done and are doing, and everything you said, is you have championed this side of transition out of the military, and I don't want the humor of this to be lost on that, because there's really not a funny book cover I could give you that would nod to everything that you've done. So I want that to be known first from a serious standpoint. But what I have here, and it's for a good friend that hopefully will listen to this show, your book title is Will Browning Knows Me.
That's right.
By Matt Kellam. So it's not that you know him. Will Browning Knows Me.
That's
by
right.
Matt Kellam. That's your book cover. So
all right, hey Lee, we got to make sure that comes up in the pivotal moments. No,
we're not going to make sure it comes up unless Will Browning brings it up. That's
Will. Yeah, I mean that's not going to be for a while. So I'm going to make sure.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Will Browning is a great friend of the show and a great friend of the channel. He's a good
awesome
person, but it's very rare we get to say that somebody that he knows somebody, right? He knows me. That's the point about it. So
that's right.
And guess who writes the foreword in that book? Will Browning. All right, Matt. Our last question is the same every single episode, but it's very important for our listeners. Pivotal Moments, our parent organization, seeks to strengthen mental fitness worldwide. That's why we're here. So how do you personally define mental fitness and share the things you do to strengthen your own mental fitness?
Yeah, I think I'll be very honest. I don't know if I really appreciated in the moments over life, when I was having mental challenges. I think every human being, deals with, just life challenges. But for example, I told you all earlier on that, I would cut class because I wasn't feeling connection or whatever it was. And I would skip class and I'd cry, every other time driving home because I didn't know what I wanted to do. But in that moment, I don't think I really thought of that as like a mental challenge or right. or whatever. And, because it wasn't talked about in the same way in the mid 90s that it is now. Fast forward, when I've had, challenges at work, I'd get frustrated and just feel like I had to roll up my sleeves and just get it done. I didn't think of like taking a break, so I had late nights that many of us have, working till 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning. So, for me, I can't say that my mental challenges have been clinical. However, I have definitely felt, depression at various times. And I think the way that I, process and handle those and I'm in my mid 40s, so it's taken me time, but I give myself a break. So for example, when COVID hit, I know that was so hard for many, many people. And it was challenging for, people in my household too, in different ways. But for me, I felt prepared. And I think the reason being is, I associated it back to other times in my life. And I thought, okay, you want me to, I committed to going away to Paris Island for 3 months to have grown men yell at me and prepare me to become a Marine. I can do this. I can live in this house that I, have a TV and get to spend time with my family. Like I just kind of channeled it a different way. So I felt prepared that way. I also knew that I needed to give, and I think a lot of us learn this. I learned this pre-COVID, for example, but I had to give myself breaks. When companies or the military or whomever says, use your vacation time, use your vacation time. Totally. Or when they say, and you kind of alluded to working for companies where you're not totally happy, it's okay to make a change. I also think it's okay to tactfully push back a little bit. And one of those examples is shut your computer down or shut your phone off at 5:30 or 6 at night. Don't ignore the work. There's still deadlines to meet, but you know what? You need to spend quality time either with yourself or your family, your friends, or all the above. So I've just, those aren't really groundbreaking things. And once you all get to know me a little bit better, or you maybe talk to Will a little bit. I know it's been some years since we saw each other last,
because he knows you. Will knows you.
Will knows me. But anyway, but I'm a simple person. So even in this space of mental fitness and mental health, I just have kept things so simple and just say, you know what, Matt Kellam can't overcomplicate this because that'll just make it worse. What can I do? And part of it is just shut it off, step away, and do what I enjoy doing, whatever that is that day. The other thing that's the simple thing is, and I don't get to do it as much. I don't make as much time for it, but I really like to exercise. I physically can't play the sports that I used to. It just hurts too bad, but I really do like exercising. And I find that is such a good release. And obviously it's good for you physically and mentally, as many of us are probably well aware.
Matt, I'll follow up with, it's a great answer. You said like, I'm simple, it's not that prolific in a way. So many people don't do what you're saying. So many people don't take the time for themselves. So it might sound simple, but it's one of those simple things we don't do. I gotta work. There's a great quote. I don't know who said it, but it was, no one on their deathbed has ever said, I wish I worked more. No one. Yeah. Never happened. It's probably never going to happen. There was a study done. This is one that hit me between the eyes. There was a study done of people on their deathbed. And I think the question was, if you could change one thing, what would it be? And it was like 99 out of 100 people said, I would have worked less and spent more time with my family or my kids.
Yeah.
Right. And that hit me between the eyes. If that many people on their deathbed are saying that, I thought twice. And you're basically saying that now.
Well, and let me reiterate that point. Again, I'm not afraid to share these things. My parents divorced when I was 2, so I didn't know any better at the time, but I grew up with my mom and my dad. I got to see him pretty often, and I'm very close with my father, to this day. But again, I mentioned early on, he worked for VEPCO or Dominion Energy for 45 years. He worked in a power station, so he worked shifts, he worked long hours, he worked odd times. So I didn't get to see him as often. And I know that he didn't even get to spend, normal hours of time with the family that, in his house. But my point for sharing that is he did a very good job of making time for all of us. And I know, I know he wishes that it was a little bit different, but anyway, he did a very good job. And so my point is, not everyone has the luxury of the 8 to 5. Sometimes you have to work a couple jobs or whatever the case. But when you have time, make that time for yourself or be with other people. And then that's the second thing that I wanted to reiterate is, I think it's so important to spend quality time, even if it's a short amount of time, but spend quality time with the people around you, whether it's you guys and me. This has been a fun hour. If it's my friends in the neighborhood, if it's my buddies from high school, if it's my daughters at home and my wife at home, make valuable time and be present in those moments. Like, don't be thinking about, 50 other things. Those things will take care of themselves. Be in the moment. And again, I know many people say that, but I think it's so important. And frankly, it took me 45 years to get to this place. I mean, it didn't happen a long time ago. It took me a while to get here.
Well,
In my
I
opinion,
will.
Matt, sometimes people leave this earth without that. No, I'm just saying, is Matt, in my opinion, sometimes people leave the earth having never been conscious or in the moment. So whether you're 45, 65, 105, or 5, you know, learning to live in the moment is a very important skill.
Yeah. I mean, it's something here. I'm 64 and I'm just really starting to learn that myself and how important that is. Hey, Matt, you've been absolutely awesome. And I sincerely want to thank you for taking the time to spend with us for a couple reasons. Number one, first of all, you've been incredibly transparent and vulnerable with us, which I really credit you, because that takes a lot of personal and professional courage. And I spend a lot of time on social media because I'm trying to help promote the pivotal moments and the Charlie Mike message and grow our audience. And I see a lot of stuff. And I will tell you, there's not a lot of people who have and many unfortunately view that kind of transparency or that kind of vulnerability as weakness. And I comment on this every time. That is not weakness. That is the essence of strength. Yeah. And it's something that we need more in our military. We need it more in our society. We need it more in our world. Yeah. And I thank you for being so transparent, so open, and so vulnerable. Because again, that to me is an incredible sign of strength, and I applaud you for it. The second thing is sharing the Dominion Energy story. I mean, some of the stuff you shared with us today is very new kind of content for us, and important new content for us. And I'm so happy it came out. And so help me continue to share that Dominion Energy story with our audience and as it grows. And I want to thank you for that. And lastly, I've spent time on the phone or in our Zoom conferences with you and with Will, and I know you spoke about a Navy SEAL. He's actually going to join us, Mark Green, and I'm going to tell you, these are 3 solid citizens, man. And I am just so appreciative to be associated with all of you, and I look forward to personally and professionally growing our relationship, the relationship between Pivotal Moments and Dominion Energy, and how we can continue to help men and women like Mark, who is thriving right now and wasn't thriving several years ago, despite the fact that he was working in probably one of the most mentally and physically challenging environments you could ever find yourself in as a Navy SEAL. And oh, by the way, a Black Navy SEAL. There are not a lot of Black men in the Navy SEAL ranks, and he was one of them. He was one of those incredible men who had what it took to achieve that. And I can't wait for his interview as well, too. So I just want to thank you, man. And again, I look forward to growing our relationship.
Well, and if I may say, and I don't mean to take a last word by any means, but thank you very much for that. And Lee, what Howie just said reminds me, I think it's worth bringing back up. Let's all just respect one another, and let's give an opportunity to meet a new person. Let's give an opportunity to have a conversation and learn from each other, whatever the topic may be. And I think back to your point, Howie, I think being willing to be a little open and vulnerable is important. Having connections, even if it's been a number of years since you've chatted with them, but Will and I connecting, and really, Will's main purpose was to hook me up with you guys, which I'm so glad he did, but also to hook me up with Mark Green. So as a little bit of a teaser, Mark Green in your future episode is an amazing person. And I am so glad, not to promote Dominion Energy in any way, but I'm so glad that he's part of our Dominion Energy team, because he is making us better. And I just wanted to acknowledge those things. So thank you all again for this opportunity.
Yeah. And I will tell you, I'm speaking to the audience now. If you're not taking a look at Dominion Energy, if you are not looking at their website and reaching out to Matt Kellam, I just highly encourage you to do that. Because if I were getting out of the military, knowing what I know now, I would be looking real hard at Dominion Energy, because I just think they're doing it right. So with that, hey, I'll turn it back over to you, Lee. But again, thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you.
You see, Matt, you thought you had the last word, but Howie came in and took it away from you. But the truth is that I always get the last word.
Lee always gets the last word, man.
I always get the last word of this show. But
don't the spouses always get the last word?
Yeah.
Always.
And your last dollar too, man.
So I don't know about that in my family, but yeah, we always get the last word. That's the point. And, so no, Matt, it's been an honor having you today. And just for everybody listening, you have been listening to Life After the Military, which is powered by Pivotal Moments. Make sure to check out our website, pivotalmoments.org, for more inspirational, entertaining, and of course, educational content. Make sure you check that out if you haven't already. For Howie Cohen and Matt Kellam, I'm Lee Elias. Thanks so much for joining us. And absolutely keep an eye out for more episodes, as that one was just heavily teased for you wherever podcasts can be heard. Thanks so much for listening, and we will see you next time. Have a great day, everybody.